G'day, my name's Chris Anderson and welcome to the Ando Co Podcast. Today I'm sitting down with Jenna Britton. We are in two different locations. I'm in Brisbane and Jenna is in Portland. And so we're speaking today about her story up until now and what she's up to. And my understanding is that she's a writer, she's a coach, and she also is a human design practitioner. So Jenna, have I got that pretty close to right, or what more would you like to add?
No, I think you've got it perfectly. I would say that I have pretty much always known that I wanted to be a writer, and it was one of those things that I did without inhibition when I was younger. I was writing all the time, creating stories, creating different worlds for myself. And then as we grow up, as tends to happen, I was told like that's a really fun hobby, but it's not necessarily a job. That's not, how you're going to make money and how you're going to support yourself. So kind of like swerved into marketing and copywriting and these ways of like taking that creativity, I thought, and channeling it into something where I could actually make a living for myself. And I do still do some of that work sometimes, but I think the last probably 5 or 6 years has been a bit of an unraveling for me of like what people told me I was able to do as a writer and what I was able to create, and figuring out if I can sort of carve a new niche for myself in that world. Part of that is because I was introduced to human design, which I know we'll talk about a little bit more, but that really showed me that each of us are very, very uniquely designed. And if we're able to align with the ways that we are in the world, with our own individual strengths, then we can have success even if it's not the way other people have found success before. So really have just been exploring like what do I want to write? How can I support other people when it comes to my writing? And for me, that has looked like, writing a newsletter. I did it pretty consistently for 2 years or so. I haven't caught up with it recently, but writing a newsletter about like my own life experiences. It was a weekly personal essay, in a sense. And then, doing human design readings to also introduce other people to their own charts. And most recently, I launched a 4-week online course called Writing Your Way Through. So people could kind of learn how to tap into their own writing and creativity to help move through any sort of transition that they may be going through in their life.
And is that now finished, the 4 weeks?
The first 4 weeks has been finished. I'm going to
Okay.
launch it again. So the plan is I did that first round, and even though I didn't call it that, it was essentially a beta round, as is anything that you're doing for the first time. And so I've
hmm
really been looking at the feedback that I've been getting from that, going back through and making sure that things are concise, adding any additional resources that people might need throughout the course, and then I will launch it again. And from there, hopefully just keep launching it in these 4-week rounds.
And what has the feedback been for the people who are doing this for the first time?
Yeah, it's been really, really positive. I think people appreciate the prompts that help them tap into their own creativity. I am a firm believer that all of us are creative, and I also think pretty much anyone is a writer as long as they're writing. But I think for a lot of us, myself included, there is a lot of conditioning that we've gotten around what it is okay to write about, what it is okay to share. And so I think people feel a lot of permission from the course to write in the way that feels best to them and that helps them tap into their own emotions or feelings around an experience or experiences that they have had. I've also gotten feedback that it's a lot of content. And so I think, I might have to figure out how can I best guide people through that experience over the course of 4 weeks. Maybe in the future, I'll make it a longer type of course. But yeah, it's been interesting. It's the first time that I've created an online education program like that, even though I have been involved in other people's. So it's an experiment. And yeah, I'm just being patient with myself and everyone else who's taking it as we make it better.
I'd say if there's a lot of content, you've probably tried to add a lot of value into what it is that you're offering them. So like
Absolutely.
too much content's probably not a bad thing.
True. Absolutely. And it's also, they don't have to go through everything. Like these are resources for them, So my feeling was like you said, I want to give them a lot of value. And also you can return to this at any time that you need to. Don't feel like you need to go through all of it in one sitting.
Awesome. And so
Yeah.
obviously you've decided that, or you realize that this is helpful and it's likely that at some point you've done it for yourself. At what
Mhm.
point did you actually get back into writing and start expressing yourself in that way?
Oh, I love this question. I feel like I had around the time I turned 30, like I don't know if you're into anything astrological, but it's when each of us go through our Saturn return around 30 years old. And it's like this sense of kind of clicking into adulthood. And for me, a lot of things happened around that time or in the couple of years following, including I ended up getting divorced. I moved from Los Angeles, California, which is where I'm from, to Portland, Oregon. This is around the time that I went to World Domination Summit here in Portland and Camp Goodlife Project, which is where we met. It was just a big time of soul searching in my life. And I think that's when I started getting back into journaling more, quite literally around. I remember sitting in upstate New York where we were at camp and sitting by the water with a journal that I had brought with me. And every day I was just writing like I hadn't written like that before. And it felt like reconnecting to myself because I was taking all of these sort of vague, nebulous thoughts that I think were in my mind and in my heart. And I was clarifying them for myself. When I saw them on the page, they were starting to make sense versus being these like sort of weird feelings of anxiety and confusion and instability. And I was able to actually make sense of them by like giving them language on the page. So that really kickstarted a renewal of journaling as often as possible. I still, have days where it doesn't happen, but I always know that if I'm feeling confused or stuck or anything like that, I can turn to a notebook and probably pretty quickly figure out what's going on with me. And then after I had moved to Portland, I started the newsletter because I wanted an outlet for writing. I wanted to write more about my experiences and share them with other people because I had experienced before that there's connection. I know you know this as well. There's connection when you write your story and share it, and other people can read it and be like, oh, me too, even if your situations weren't the same. And I wanted something that would hold me accountable. So I put out a newsletter so that people would be expecting something from me every week, and did that for almost 3 years.
Awesome. And what did you get constant feedback on newsletters? Were people often replying after you sent them?
Yes and no. I got some good feedback sometimes. In the beginning, it was a lot of my mom and my friends, who were writing about this stuff, and I suspect like just wanted to know what was going on in my life, sort of thing. But
yep.
The longer I did it and the more consistent I was with it, the more I would find like, oh, somebody signed up and I had no idea who they were. Or I would have friends, referring me to someone else or something like that. And so I wouldn't say that I got a lot of feedback. It certainly wasn't consistent. And sometimes that was tough because it kind of felt like, is anybody reading this? But there was also a lesson for me in I can show up and do this for myself too. Like if it's important to me and it's helping me process, then it's also valuable. But every once in a while I'd get an email from someone who I didn't recognize saying that they really connected with something or something, really hit them or touched them on a deep level. And it just reminded me of like, wow, sometimes we have no idea who we're connecting with, but if we're willing to keep showing up and putting ourselves out there, we are likely connecting with someone. And I know that too, as someone who has read other people's things and maybe not responded all the time, but been very much touched by and supported by their work.
Awesome. I find, I don't know how it is for you, but I remember having a conversation with my psychologist where she sort of said, look, if you're up at night and you can't sleep, then just have a notebook next to your table, write it down, whatever it is that you're thinking about at the time, and then make sure you shut that notebook so that your subconscious can turn that off. Do you find that after you've written about something, you can almost just stop worrying about it?
Yes, absolutely. Also, I love that advice. I don't keep a notebook by my bed, but that's great advice. I do find that because I think the thing is, if I'm not like actually clarifying it, like I was talking about, if I'm not letting myself put language to it, it just swirls in me. It's just this sort of nebulous anxiety because like I was saying, I'm not like putting it to words. So I just feel this feeling of heaviness or like confusion or stuckness, or I don't know what to do. And it sounds kind of silly or, perhaps spiritual or esoteric, but like it feels like I can take it out of me and put it on the page, and then I don't have to work. I don't have to hold it anymore.
Awesome.
Because it's there.
Yeah. You've read Big Magic?
Yes, I love Big Magic.
Yeah. Just the way she talks about who your muse is and how that works and how that can somehow be moved between different people because you haven't necessarily taken hold of the idea and run with it.
Yes.
So
I also love Liz Gilbert or Elizabeth Gilbert. She was one of the first people it was Eat, Pray, Love that I
mhm.
read, and I had read it prior to the end of my marriage, and honestly, that book, I know that there are people that don't like it as much, but that book gave me a lot of courage in terms of sometimes you can leave a relationship and there's not necessarily anything wrong on the outside, but it's not right for you. And if you are feeling like, this isn't the relationship for me or the job for me, or, whatever it might be, insert your situation for relationship here. But like, it was reading her personal story that made me like gave me strength, and that I remind myself of that when I think about my own writing and like, oh, nobody cares, why do I write about my life? Like, I have these kind of moments of self-deprecation or imposter syndrome, and I'm reminded of people like Liz who write about their life, and
Mm.
because they do that, I have benefited from it.
And I think it's cool to have read people's stories at a point where you're going through a transition around that year, like 30 years old, split from the marriage, and then maybe there's in some way they've made you feel like you should start focusing on writing yours because you've read theirs. Do you know what I mean? So
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
And when you started writing, what were you initially focusing on, and where is that focus today? How has that changed? Just reflective writing.
I think when I started writing, or rather when I restarted writing as an adult, particularly around that newsletter time, I was kind of just writing about what was happening in my life. Like each week, I would think about what is something that I've gone through and what have I learned from that. And part of that is just because I think I'm very personally development minded. I think very similar to you. Like I'm constantly thinking in terms of like, what is the lesson in this? What is it that I'm trying to avoid here? Is there some kind of shadow I don't want to look at? Or, I'm like constantly digging, I think, a little bit. And so that's what it was in the beginning. And I think now I am less trying to like lay out what the lesson is for other people and
Mm,
more just writing about my own experience.
mm,
And ideally, I would love to write several books, but I definitely want to write like a book of personal essays. And so I've just been thinking a lot on not what's happening in my current life, but what are the totality of my life experiences so far,
mm,
and what is sort of the through line of them, what's the pattern that like ties them all together kind of, and
mhm.
what's the story that I can pull out from that, to share with other people. So I think I've kind of like gone up a little bit more macro to look at my life holistically and figure out like, what have I learned so far in these 37 years? And I'm under no illusion that I have so much life experience that it's like, you know, I don't know. I know I have a lot more to learn, hopefully, and
Mm,
many, many more years ahead of me. But
mm,
I do like to look back on this first period of my life and figure out like what can I share from
mm.
this.
I think the other thing is when I think back about I don't write often, but I do enjoy it, and I've found some reflective writing, well, all the reflecting I do, reflective writing I've done, has been helpful for me. But I realized that initially, when I first sent something to some of my friends, it was like a 10 tips on how to do X better. Like it was
Mhm.
learning it. And I realized I actually did write the story, and I sort of left it as an option as to whether you read that, because for me at the time, I'd probably just read through the tips without worrying about the story. But
Yeah.
even just in being attracted to the first podcast I ever got into was Goodlife Project.
Yeah.
And I think through just, and at the time I wasn't working. And at the time it was video podcasts, and I would sit down and watch these two people have a conversation. And it felt the closest thing it could be to me in a cafe or a bar or something like that, just listening to two people chat and being part of that conversation. So I think through listening to more stories gave me more appreciation that actually they don't need to highlight what it is that you need to learn from that story, because you get
Yes.
to choose what's important from it based on the story that you've listened to or read. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's so true. And also, I think that there's enormous value, I think, in more like educational or informative articles and things like that. And also, I do feel that we have been told there's more value in that than in our personal stories. Like I hear a
Hmm.
lot of people talk about, personal essay or memoir or something like that being navel gazing, or it's someone who's just like it's their journal or their diary. And I don't think that that's what it is. I think, like you said, there we as the writer can tell the parts of our story that we know are relevant to our experience and to our evolution as a human, and we can trust our reader to take from it whatever they need,
Mm.
or whatever serves them. We don't necessarily have to like serve it up for them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And so I'm interested, obviously, like when I introduced you, writer, coach, human design. When did
Yes.
when did human design and coaching come in, and which would you like to start talking about first?
Well, human design came in first, and it kind
Sure.
of colors all of that. So I'll speak to that first. But yeah, I first learned about it in 2018. I was driving from Seattle to Portland, which is about a 3 hour drive, and I was listening to a podcast, and they were interviewing a human design reader named Jenna, and I was fascinated. I just, how you hear about certain systems or personality tests or whatnot, and
Hmm.
you are just like, I had to go down a rabbit hole as soon as I got home. um, for those of you who don't know what human design is, it's essentially a self-discovery system, kind of like a personality test and kind of like astrology. It's not either of those things, though. It's a combination of several different modalities, some sort of like indigenous systems that have been around for a long time, and other more like quantum science type topics. But essentially, you put in your birth information, your birth date, time, and location, and you get a chart, what sometimes is called a body graph, and it is very odd looking if you've never seen one before. And there's all kinds of shapes and lines and colors, but essentially it highlights the way that you are designed to work in the world, the way that your energy moves, and what you have consistent access to and what you maybe don't have consistent access to. It highlights your strengths and the role that you're designed to play in the world. And really, it even highlights kind of what your purpose is, and not necessarily from a career perspective, but your overall, like, as a human being on this earth, what are you here to do? And I hesitate to say to do, because it's not really something in terms of human design, we call it the incarnation cross, and it's not something you have to do per se or learn how to do. It will do you is what I have heard many other practitioners say. Like, it's what you're here to do. It's going to naturally come out of you if you keep aligning with your energy according to your human design chart. So I went down the rabbit hole with this. I bought a bunch of like self-study programs. Mostly I was trying to learn about my own human design first, and then I, like badgered all my friends and family for their birth information, and was looking up everybody else's charts. And then I finally signed up first for a 3 month mentorship in sort of the basic foundational pieces of human design, finished that, and then signed up for a year-long mentorship around all of the advanced parts of reading a chart. And I just finished that last September. I have since become a program advisor in that same program. Have been doing that for almost a year now as well. And so about a little over a year ago, when I got let go from my last job, I decided this is my opportunity to really sort of start like offering this as a service to people. And human
Hmm.
design readings is one way. Like, I can pull up someone's chart and tell them about it and talk through different parts of it. But what was really important to me was helping people find clarity and helping them feel more connected to themselves, the most authentic version of themselves, and whatever it is that they were here to do. So, which is kind of a through line for me, even with the Writing Your Way Through course. Like, my goal is to help people find clarity.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's through writing, sometimes it's through a human design reading, sometimes it's through coaching. So I started coaching as well, using people's human design chart as a sort of way to ask them questions and guide them toward the parts of themselves that really align with the energy that I was seeing in their human design chart. So started doing that, like I said, a little over a year ago, and have been doing it ever since.
Awesome. And when you started looking into your personal human design chart, what was the reading that you eventually were able to give to yourself in terms of learning
Mm.
about what works best for you?
Yeah, so um, this is such a good question. Uh, from a high level, I would say that I learned I learned that I am not necessarily meant to be doing all of the doing per se. Like I really operate best as a guide, sort of, as someone who comes in and asks questions and sees people's and systems and is like, you would actually be better doing that. Or like, or like I was saying with the coaching, like just helping guide people back to their own sense of self, their own inner clarity, things like that, instead of being the one necessarily like in there building something or whatever it might be. Like I really work well talking to someone and giving them an idea and then stepping away and going on to guide someone else instead of helping them like build that idea out, if that makes sense. Yeah. And then the other thing, and you and I have talked about this because you have the same profile as me, but the other thing is I'm a 6'2" profile, which means that part of it is we have 3 very distinct life phases in kind of like 30-year increments. And so that really shed a lot of light on that first 30 years for me, which had been very trial and error and a lot of like bumping up against life and trying to figure out where I fit. And then the second part of that, the 2 in the 6'2" is about being a natural and having something that comes very naturally to you and aligning with that and leaning into that and letting people call that out of you. And for me, that's writing. And for a long time, because I was told like, that's not a way that you make money, like go find another way to do that, go get into marketing, whatever it might be, I kind of let that go. And human design reminded me like, no, you're a natural at it for a reason. Lean into that and let people support you in making that a thing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And just thinking about, so obviously it's writing, and then from there, what were the big things that popped up to you that says, don't focus here? Like obviously you've been bumping around for a little while for those first 30 years. Obviously you've got a feel for what works best for you, but were there big sort of red crosses saying, don't focus on doing things this certain way? Like, and I guess the next thing is, was that the way that you'd previously been doing things?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we talk about in human design is a signature and a NotSelf. So there's 5 types, and each type has their signature, which is like when you're feeling this way, you are in alignment with your type. And for a projector, which is what I am, that signature is success. Right. So if I'm feeling successful, or that I am in a position, whether it's a job, relationship, or whatever, where I'm being set up for success, then I feel alignment with that. And then the not self of that is bitterness. So if I'm feeling bitter, or like I haven't been, recognized or acknowledged for however I'm guiding someone, then that's probably a sign that I'm not in something that's the right fit for me.
Cool.
And so I can think back on a lot of past work experiences, even relationships where I was very bitter or resentful, that I didn't feel seen, that I didn't feel recognized for what I brought to that interaction. And that's been really helpful for me, even on a day-to-day basis of like, oh, I can sense some bitterness creeping in here. Or I'm a little resentful of this like interaction that we're having. It can even happen in like a client relationship, right? And so I have to kind of like step back and reassess and be like, okay, is this still the right opportunity? Not just for me, but for them as well. Because if I'm feeling sort of like off from it, then there's probably something that's off for both of us.
So is it for all types in human design? Will they generally get an understanding of something that's wrong from a feeling? Is that the way that everyone talks, or is that just like a
so
certain
each type
type
has their own. Each type has their own. Like for instance, you're a generator. And so the signature for a generator is satisfaction. And so when you're feeling that feeling of satisfaction, it's usually a sign that you are aligned. And then the opposite is frustration. So if you're feeling a lot of frustration around something, it's probably not in alignment for you. But the other thing that we talk about in human design is your strategy. Each type has a specific strategy, which is a way of like kind of responding to life or interacting with life and people around you. And then you also have an authority, and your authority is how you're most aligned to make decisions. Or if you follow your authority, you're more likely to make aligned decisions. So for instance, for you have a sacral authority, and that essentially is like gut instinct. So when you have that gut knowing about something, that's your sign, whether it's a yes or a no, it's expansive or it's a contracting, that is your sign of whether or not something is right for you. And we talk a lot about like gut instinct in general, and I think everybody to a certain extent has access to intuition. They have access to, you know, these senses of like, oh, this is maybe not right, or red flags or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But there are different types of authorities for different parts of a human design chart, and not everyone's is gut instinct. For instance, some people have what's called an emotional authority,
Mm-hmm.
which means that they have a very consistent like emotional wave, and they are meant to let themselves ride that wave before they make a decision. And so we usually tell someone with emotional authority, wait 24 hours before you make a big decision. Like let
Mm.
yourself go through the highs and the lows and come to a place of neutrality, and then make a decision from that place. So, you know, using all of these in tandem, your strategy and authority, you will hear any human design practitioner always tell you, come back to strategy and authority before anything else. And then you can also bring in these other aspects like, am I feeling satisfaction, or am I feeling frustration? Am I feeling successful? Am I feeling bitter? And kind of go from there.
Do you think because of learning this skill and then better understanding that the way that you're meant to listen to yourself is a certain way, you've become better at being able to self-assess over time?
I think I have. I think I've become better. And also, I don't think I'm remotely close to getting it right all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Going back to your earlier question about like, does it all come back to a feeling? I really appreciate that question, because I think a lot of what human design tells us, or helps us remember, is that there's so much wisdom in our physical body and in
Mm-hmm.
our feelings. And I think most of us have been taught to operate and make decisions and all of that mostly from our minds. And human design teaches that our minds are really powerful, and they're really, really amazing partners in making decisions, but they're not the decision maker. It
Mm.
is the physical wisdom of our body. It is, you know, the experiences that we've had, the feelings that we have about certain things that,
Mm-hmm.
and you can bring in the mind, you can bring in, you know, what you've learned and things like that. But like ultimately, that shouldn't be the thing that makes decisions. And I say all that to say, I still try to make decisions from my mind all the time. Like still try to pro con list things, or
Mm-hmm.
I'll have like a kind of intuitive sense about something, and that's my authority. It's called splenic authority, and it's really about
Mm-hmm.
like that quiet whisper of intuition, and what does that tell me?
Mm-hmm.
And there are still times where I have an intuitive like thought about something, and immediately my mind jumps in and is like, that doesn't make sense though. That would never work. Or like, you know,
Ah,
whatever it might be. And
yeah, yeah.
every once in a while I can catch it and be like, oh, I see what you're doing. Like, it's okay, mind, we're good. You don't have to, you know, try to jump in and protect me there. But there are other times where I get, you know, I can go days or weeks, or actually make a decision from my mind and be like, oh, yep, that's why this isn't working out, because I didn't listen to my intuition.
Well, the interesting thing is, even obviously you'd spend a lot of time working in marketing. That's only going to be helpful for you now, focusing more on obviously writing, human design,
Yeah.
coaching. Like having that background is ideal. So if you
Yeah.
think about those three phases, that trial and error, in the
Mhm.
way that you've now been able to place yourself has allowed you to have all the skills that you need that many writers could have. They have the skills to write, but they don't necessarily have the way of thinking that a marketer thinks. And so
Yes.
it's interesting that you've like obviously you've gone through that time, and you know, as it turns out, probably learned all the right skills for exactly what you're going through right now. And
Absolutely.
thinking about, as you said it, my main background is in sales, and
Mhm.
so I also like I'd worked in management consulting, learned how to analyze situations well, but I realized that the way that I would start trying to sell to someone was in over analyzing the whole situation to take them on the whole like
Mhm.
journey that I need to go on to convince myself that this is the right decision and that and whatever. And so when you're having a sales conversation and you do that and there's no actual emotional hook in it, it's just
Mhm.
purely logic.
Mhm.
Their brains don't make a buying decision with
Yeah.
logic generally.
Yep.
Their body has to go, no, like emotionally, I'm making this decision. Most people don't want to admit that it was an emotional decision, but
Yeah.
that's how we buy. That's how our brains work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of what we were talking about with the storytelling before, where you were like, you know, I wrote out this, like, here's 10 things that you can learn from this sort of thing. And that can be really great. And our minds can take that in. But I think you telling your story or me telling my story gives people an opportunity to like emotionally hook
Mm-hmm.
in a way where they're like, oh, my physical body resonates with that or remembers that, or
Mm.
I feel connected to you and less alone because of the experience that you're sharing. And that is what I think people they connect with. It's what they resonate with. It's what they really remember, and are changed by.
Mm. And so as it turns out, we then got back to the story. The emotional story is what you end up being somewhat connected to.
Yes.
If so, obviously you've run through my chart a little bit. I understand you've got my chart sitting there in front of you. Sorry, you sent me a very well written guide of how to deal with like me as a 6'2".
Yeah.
But I guess if I were to just be starting from scratch now, and I basically say, "Hey, Jenna, I'm interested in this human design stuff. What can you do for me?" Like, how would it work?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were being introduced to it for the first time, I would probably just go over the basics with you. And so
Mm-hmm.
some of them we've talked about a little bit. I would tell you your type, you're a generator. There are technically four different types, but one of the types is an offshoot of the generator. It's called the manifesting generator.
Mm-hmm.
So there's generator, manifesting generator, manifester, reflector, and projector. So those are the five types. They're kind of like your sun sign in astrology. There are obviously not very many of them, so you'll probably find a lot of generators in the world if you were, to see everyone's human design chart. But each of them has a different sort of energy and a different strategy, like we talked about, and way of like interacting with the world. I would also tell you your strategy and authority. So, like I said, you have a sacral authority. There
Mm-hmm.
are, I believe, 9 different decision making authorities. So, not all of us are designed to make our decisions in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very important because we are often taught to think in the same way, to make decisions the same way, to interact with the world in the same way. And so even just looking at type, strategy, and authority, we have already differentiated people into like first 5 different types, 9 different authorities. And then there's profile, which we've talked about a little bit, which is sort of what is the role that you're meant to play in the world. And we've talked about the 6'2" because that's what you and I both are, but there's 12
Mm-hmm.
different profiles as
Mm-hmm.
well. So not everyone's meant to interact in the same way. And that has been so useful for me, both in not only understanding, well, all of this has been, not only
Mm-hmm.
understanding how I'm designed to operate, but it's like, I live in this house with my partner, and it helps me remember sometimes when I'm like, I don't understand why you are doing this the way that you're doing it, or why you're interacting with the situation the way that you are. And then to remind myself that he doesn't interact with the world the same way that I do. He's not
Mm-hmm.
designed to. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, it's one of those things that we know, but it's so easy to forget in relationship because it's like, why wouldn't you do it the way that I do it? My way is so great. And human design reminds me that not only is he different from me, but he's supposed to be different from me. He's playing a different role. He has different strengths. You know what I mean? So, and not just him, but like everyone in my life. It just helps me understand as I interact with people around me in the world. So if we were doing, just a basic reading like that, I would probably cover those things with you and obviously go much deeper into what each of those mean and the energies around them, and honestly ask you a lot of questions, because
Mm-hmm.
even if I met another sacral generator 6'2" out in the world, they're still going to be different from you. They're still going to have different life experiences. They're still going to have different conditioning from the world around them. They're going to have different experiences that have told them how they can or cannot be in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I would really just try to help them align back with this natural way that they're designed and see how they can start tangibly showing up that way in their relationships or in their work, or even just, in their own time. Um, and then if we were doing a more advanced reading, if you already had those basics down, I would start talking to you about, the different centers in human design. Each of them is responsible for a different type of energy. And if you have them colored in, that means you have them defined, or you have consistent access to the energy of that center. If they're not colored in, if they're white, you have inconsistent access to that energy. So you're more likely to take on that energy from other people. And it's really
Mm-hmm.
important to figure out, like, is this mine? Is this someone else's? And really come back to yourself as often as possible. Then there's also all of these lines in the chart, and those are called channels. And if you only have one side of it, you just have a gate. And if you have those colored in, those are different strengths. Those also represent different kinds of energy, and those are strengths that you can bring to your work or your relationships or your ways of being in the world. So there's just a lot. I'm just like barely touching the surface, or skimming the surface, but there's a lot that I can pull from. And the deeper you go, the more you can see how it creates this very unique individual. And one of the funnest parts, I think, of a reading is taking all of that information and trying to synthesize it together. Like, what does it mean to be a 6/2 sacral generator with the 515 channel defined and only your identity center and your sacral center? Like, taking all of those things and actually like creating a story out of it, creating like the story of Chris and who you are and how you're designed to be in the world, and getting to share that with people is a really, I think, special and it's a privilege for me experience to be able to sort of highlight that for them.
And when you think back through all the people that you've given a reading to, what percentage do you think would be currently living out of alignment with their design?
Oh, good question. I mean, I think all of us, myself included, are probably living out of alignment with our design at least some of the time. Mostly because we live in relationship with other people. Like, I think we'd kind of have to live in a silo to be like 100% in our design all the time. We're always being conditioned or influenced by other people and other experiences. But I do think that the people that I've had readings with have a deeper awareness of themselves, or at the very least, they already had that awareness, and the human design reading gave them permission of like, yes, you're supposed to be this way. Keep showing up this way. Please keep being yourself because we need you to. And you're also going to be a lot more likely to find success. And I don't even just mean success in terms of, business or money or anything like that, but success in terms of just feeling like you can be your authentic self, feeling happy and fulfilled and content in your life, because you don't have to pretend to be something that you're not. And so I think 100%, I hope, of the people that I've given a reading to have that sense. And even if they find themselves living out of alignment with their design, they are able to see that, to become aware of that pretty quickly and snap back into how they know they're meant to be, probably in ways that they weren't as able to do before.
Yeah. I think that one of the big benefits for me is, understanding that sacral response, but two, finding out that as a 6/2, my first 30 years or so was going to be lived as a 3. And it was all not necessarily going to work for me. That just, when I think back on me up until 30 and then even a little bit beyond, I was just trying one new thing, trying the next new thing. Like, didn't stay in jobs for much longer than sort of 3 years or something along those lines, if even. And then and it just seemed like there are other people who, were just stuck in one thing and it's all working out for them. And in the meantime, like I was, one, beating myself up for having done it, but then two, having looked at the human design, it suddenly just allowed me to go, oh, dude, that was always going to happen. Like, you can't beat yourself up for it. That's just what was going to happen.
Exactly. And it was all for something, right? Like it might have been painful. I think a lot of times that first 30 years can feel really painful, especially if you don't know what's happening. Like, why isn't it working out for me when it seems to be working out for everyone else? But that, the second phase for a 6 line, we call it going up on the roof. And it's kind of like removing yourself a little bit from the fray of life and like looking back on your experiences and starting to integrate everything that you've learned. And that's the phase you and I are both in right now. And I see it so clearly for both of us that we are just like, whoa, what happened? And like, what did I learn from this? And already trying to figure out like, and how can I use all of that experience to serve other people? Like to make this beyond just my personal experience of life. How can I take all of that and do something with it? So yeah, it's kind of like it was hard a lot of the time and confusing and painful, like I said, but it's a little bit easier now to look back on it and see, I kind of see why it all had to happen.
I think the other thing is just a certain level of excitement, knowing that the period that I'm in is what I'm in and I can't really rush it. but I
Yeah.
have something to look forward to in the last phase of life as well as a 6'2".
Hmm.
Like it just that it works that way is sort of interesting, and I'd love to be able to map certain let's say business owners or people or writers or whatever, and see whether somehow the timing aligns with what was expected from a human design profile. Like the
Hmm.
people who didn't
Yes.
make it in the first sort of 50 years, like how many of
Yes.
those actually were 6'2s kind of thing.
Yes,
So,
it's so interesting. I mean, you can actually, I think the website, or I know one of the human design websites is called geneticmatrix.com.
mhm.
And I'm pretty sure you can go on there and they have like an archive of celebrity human design charts, and you can look by type or profile or maybe authority. I'm not sure, but I think you
Mhm.
can look up like all the 6'2s that they have in their database. So I
Awesome.
think that would be really interesting. I've seen people do, celebrity chart readings too. I think I mentioned to you that Barack Obama was a 6'2", and so it was
Okay.
interesting to see how someone like mapped out his life trajectory and
Mhm.
yeah. So I agree with you. It's super interesting. And I just want to note for anyone who's listening, even if you're not a 6'2", there's 11 other profiles. They all have their own unique sort of ways of being and roles that you play in the world. And if anyone's interested in learning more, I'm happy to point them in the direction of more information.
Awesome. And so I mentioned those sort of three phases in the 6'2" profile. Obviously, you and I are both in a situation where we're reflecting on everything that we've learned based on all the things that maybe didn't go right and some things that did, and then trying to focus on what will be sort of us from
Mm-hmm.
that sort of 50-ish stage. When you
Yeah.
think about that, do you have something in mind that you're excited
I
about?
I do. I have
Awesome.
something in mind, which is I just imagine myself writing books all the time. Writing books and like speaking on stages. Like basically I want to write a book and then I want to talk to people about my book and then I want to go back and write another book and go from there. And yeah, I just imagine that as like a very satisfying life. And also I'm in this phase of my life where I'm realizing that the way that I tried to like really tightly grip onto what my life was going to be like or who I was going to be or what my career would look like or what I meant to contribute kind of like took some of the magic away from my process, like in the way that
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about, oh, I can look back on those 30 years and it was rough then, but I get it now. I am trying to remind myself that like I can try something right now and it doesn't necessarily have to be the thing for the rest of
Mm-hmm.
my life. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
feeling called to it, if I have that instinctive, splenic authority response to something, like go for it, have fun with it. And not all of the things are maybe going to be what I'm doing when I'm 50, but when I'm
Mm-hmm.
50, I'm going to look back and be like, "Oh, that's why I did that
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
needed, whatever that experience, that relationship, that story
Mm-hmm.
to tell later." So I do have that vision and I hold it with a lot of excitement and also I'm trying to hold on loosely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's one thing that I was just thinking about in terms of some of your backstory. I've only just started out in coaching and I'm just working with a couple of people at the moment, but I find that there's one particular question where you're looking at significant life events. So many people I've spoken to have spoken about a change in city. Was that
Mm,
like, would you say that that was significant for you, and how did it change things for you when you moved?
yeah. It was hugely significant. I mean, also it was just like a tumultuous time in my life. So I think it was a combination of a lot of things that made that time in my life significant. But for me, it was getting to place myself in a literal other part of my country. Um, I think allowed me to look with fresh eyes upon myself, upon my
Mm-hmm.
situation. It's kind of like that you kind of need to take yourself out of a situation sometimes to be able to see things differently. And I feel like that's what I needed. I will
Mm-hmm.
tell you that at the time, I wasn't like thinking that clearly. I was just like, I got to move. I got to do something different. I got to get out of here. And Portland had been a place that I had always loved. And even from the first time I came, I was like, oh, I'm going to live here one day. And I had no idea how or when or why, but it worked out that's where I ended up those couple of years later. So, yeah, I think for me it was what I needed to be able to see things differently, to have a new perspective. I needed a literal new perspective.
And what would you say is the biggest change since you left Los Angeles and moved to Portland? If you would just think about the one way that your life is different now, what would that be?
I think that I've settled a little bit. And when I say that, what I mean is I think I used to try and find some exciting new thing or tried to blow up some part of my life because I was like, I need something different, or I need to fix something, or I need to whatever. And now I feel like I can settle with things. I can sit with discomfort. I can continue to self-develop and grow, but also not constantly nitpick myself and feel that I always have to be looking for something to fix. And I don't know if that's Portland. I don't know if that's the move, or if it's just part of growing up, or if it's part of our second phase of like getting up on the roof and like not needing to bump into things all the time. But I can just tell that I am calmer. And I do still want exciting things, I do still want to like leap and see if the net will appear sometimes. And also I'm like really happy with just like being at home with my partner and my dog and reading a book, and not everything has to be this big event in my life anymore.
So you say he's sort of slowed down a little bit?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, it's funny for me to reflect on moving from Brisbane to Toronto, and without having to tell the whole story, my walking pace changed, like significantly. Like I remember getting to Toronto and going we were getting like a bagel or something like that. And I hadn't been working, and I was just sort of pretty chill. And I got in the line for the bagel, and everyone's stressed and they're rushing. And I got to there were so many questions when I got to the end. They're like, and what about this? And what about this? And how would you like this? And I was like, oh my God, just give me a fucking bagel. Do you know, like I was just like, and I got out of it and I was just like, oh my, I don't want to be here. Like, I don't want to be in this situation. There's something so stressful about it. And I think partially because I'd taken that break, I'd come back into it and it no longer felt native. But I realized by at the end of the time that I lived in Toronto, I had just sped things up so much because I was obviously things weren't necessarily working out for me at the time, but I was just so in my head and I was so used to having to rush around, especially in real estate over there, that I needed to learn. Like if you listen back to how I talk in Toronto versus now, I sound like a completely different person.
Wow.
And so it's interesting that I just basically over the last couple of years, just like you have, it's just been a sort of gradual slow down and relaxing. I'm still probably doing a little bit too much stuff, but that's also exciting for me. But generally things have relaxed a lot more. And I'll generally know just through the music that I'm listening to. Like you'll just notice that for one point you were listening to X BPM, and then next thing it had slowed down considerably, and you don't really jump back into that sort of music anymore. So it's been an interesting situation.
That's so interesting to note. I don't know that I've had anything like that tangible, but yeah, that's super fascinating.
Yeah. Well, where can people find you if they're looking to get in touch?
Yeah, so my website is jennabritton.com. I have another one where for my coaching and human design reading, that's at braveenoughtobe.com, but they're all linked to each other. So if you find one, you'll find the other. And then I'm on Instagram at Jenna Britton Writes, WRITES. And email is jenna@jennabritton.com.
Awesome. And before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered it. I really appreciate the time. And like I said earlier, if anyone has questions about human design, I'm always happy to answer them. You don't have to book a session necessarily if you just want to be pointed in the right direction for more information. But I love talking about this. I love really helping people connect to the most authentic version of themselves and really feel comfortable and have the permission to live that out every day of their lives. So appreciate you, Chris, having a conversation with me. And
I realized there's one last question that I didn't touch on. Does the coaching sit, or does human design almost sit inside the coaching and they sort of help each other and that's how it works?
It does, yeah. So the
Awesome.
coaching I will always look up someone's human design chart as part of the coaching and like
Hmm.
sort of guiding me as I guide them. But
Hmm.
also, some people don't necessarily want to be coached; they just want the information about their human design, and so
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
why I separately have the human design readings as an offer.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah,
Jenna, thanks very much for sitting down with me. I hope you enjoy
yeah.
your Saturday night as I roll into my Sunday afternoon. And yeah, again, thanks for taking the time to talk.
Of course. Thank you so much, Chris.
Cheers, Jenna. Bye bye.